Hey peeps, it's Tripl-L, and today I'm here to bring you the Fairy Tail chapter 498, my thoughts and impression, top moment style, because that helps me organize the video. And what can I say about this chapter? Well, actually, overall, I struggled to make this into a top moment video because there weren't really that many moments. It was really a battle chapter for the first half, and then the second half got kind of weird when you consider the characterization and motives of Invel. So what's going to end up happening, I'm going to talk through the standout moments, and then really when we get to the Invel part of the chapter, that's where things get kind of interesting. And then I think I'm just going to talk a bit about the philosophy of darkness and the way that Fairy Tail is handling it. So that's just for funsies. Let's just get right into it. Let's go through this chapter. So first thing off that we have to talk about, the cover page. It's a total fan service page, but now I'm really wondering, guys, who's the point of view character in that particular page? Like, I feel if they expanded on every cover page that Hiro Mashima has done, we'd have some very interesting kind of dynamics within the Fairy Tail characters. Because, most likely it's Natsu who would be looking at Lucy in this particular situation if we were trying to apply full logic to that situation. And I just wonder, that's Hiro Mashima just really selling it with his characters, and I wonder, well, how would this be handled if we took it seriously as a moment that happened at some point in the canon. Anyway, that's just like something to think about. Moving on. So this chapter was effectively Gray versus Invel. So one of the top moments at the beginning was Invel pulling rank on Gray and nullifying his regular ice magic. So the way that magics interact in Fairy Tail, it can be very interesting, but we never get enough detail. And this time the detail or the explanation we get is just Invel has a superior breed of ice magic. Like, he's manipulating ice at the essence of what ice is. So very interesting, but it is a bit of a cop-out. So when we get the next moment of Gray pulling Devil Slayer and actually managing to harm Invel, it's very interesting because the Devil Slayer power and the way that Invel describes it, it seems that Devil Slayer is just a magic energy type and the ice is just effectively the medium by which it travels. So interesting stuff. It's interesting that by just infusing the Devil Slayer factor into the regular magic, that it makes it into something that Invel can't really deal with. But this is pretty much what sets up the rest of the chapter, and honestly, I did think this was executed very strangely. The pacing is just very strange, especially for what Invel is assuming at the end. Everything was just very strangely executed. So then next moment was when Invel confirms that devil slaying magic is effectively a double-edged sword, because in the same manner that Dragon Slayer magic pretty much dragonifies a user, Devil Slayer magic seems to deteriorate the person's sanity and bring them closer to, I guess, darkness. It gets pretty abstract after that point. Anyway, another top moment, and I just thought this was really impressive, was that Invel used pretty much Ice Age. He pretty much made snow everywhere, and what was interesting was that it kind of overrides the sandstorm effect that I forget his name. Why am I forgetting his name now? The sand guy is pretty much overriding his sandstorm effect, so that was pretty cool. And if Invel really wanted to, he could have ended this whole battle with that move. He could have frozen everyone because he can control the essence of ice, right? Like, he could just freeze everything. Anyway, here's where we start getting into like the really interesting moments to talk about. So Invel says that darkness is neither good or evil, and right before that, Gray premised it by asking like if they recognized that they were the bad guys, because they had this whole little like argument about darkness and how Zaref is pretty much dark, like his dark magic comes from that and whatever. That's all cool, but what's really important here that I kind of want to talk about is Invel saying that darkness is neither good or evil, because I think that's a very mature approach. And at least in real world, some school of thought, darkness is very much seen as something that's neutral, right? It's the same as light. They're seen as something neutral, but darkness accomplishes a purpose that light does not. See, when it came to these very old school of thoughts, darkness was the type of thing that was recognized as someone's protector. So it effectively ties in with the concept of the night and what the night was originally for in spiritual practice. So for nighttime, the darkness represented this kind of safety blanket, that you were safe in your sleep. It was a kind of promise. It was overall recognized for its protective nature because of its obscuring properties. And so it carried all the way through that it was considered, if you were to sleep in the sunlight, you would be doing more damage to yourself. Sleeping in the sunlight was something that was considered kind of dangerous because of the effects of the sun on an unguarded body. But by sleeping in darkness, that effect was mitigated, and darkness was effectively the time of rest. And if you were to look at just the biology of how your body works, how your body produces melatonin or any other kind of hormone that induces sleep, it does that in the presence of darkness. It doesn't do that in the presence of light. Actually, light from computers and such are more liable to, or more capable of, destroying your internal hormones that promote sleep and whatever. Anyway, the overall idea is that Invel's idea of darkness, I think, is the philosophically correct one. But what's interesting in Gray, and especially in the follow-up moment where Gray attributes darkness to villain, saying that he will become as black as a villain if it means accomplishing his goal, I think it is a sign of Fairy Tail doing their fairy tale thing, right? Because in this particular context, I guess darkness would be considered the thing to rally behind. It would be considered the thing that, you know, would be instrumental in the descent to evil. And you know, it's a very one-sided type of approach to the darkness issue, but that's fine, because it is, at the end of the day, a manga for young kids. It doesn't need to go overly complex with the morality of darkness and light, because you have to remember, right, like, darkness is not exactly evil. It's just that because it's of an obscuring nature, it tends to be associated to evil. But in the very same way, light in some other series has been portrayed to be evil as well. And it's very interesting when you get that kind of approach, because both can be made to seem evil because they're both neutral at the end of the day. That neutrality pretty much opens them up to being used in whatever way the user wants, right? So it's just a very interesting kind of debate that's going on between Invel and Gray. And I think Gray's dismissal of it and his association of it very quickly is unfortunate. But that said, we should not forget the fact that darkness does seem to be the one that causes very interesting things to happen to someone's psyche. And that's unfortunate, but hey. Well, actually, if anything, Devil Slayer is not exactly equal to darkness. Devil Slayer is a very polarized power for sure. And if anything, if you look on Zaref's side, you have an example of a character who seems to be using a lot of light in what's it called, the White Dragneel Rashid. I can't recall his name very well, but he might be an interesting example to look at in the future. Anyway, let's move away from that philosophical approach, and let's move on to like the last part of the chapter with Natsu breaking out of the ice. Now that was very interesting. That was expected. Natsu has the power to pretty much evaporate a lake, so he should be able to melt out of ice. I mean, that's a given. But in terms of parallels, it's good that he got it because Gray is unaffected by the ice, so Natsu should be unaffected by it, just to prove that Natsu is capable of being his equal, especially with the way that Invel is setting it up. And let's just go through the final moments. The next moment I really liked was Brandish pulling the Natsu and Lucy pair away from the fight, so clearly she's separating them. She wants to talk to them most likely. And finally, Invel forcing Gray and Juvia to get in this situation where they have to kill each other, and I'm doing air quotations. And he's pretty much playing chess master because he's come to this weird conclusion that Gray is the one that's going to take out Natsu, because he sees the darkness in Gray about to burst out, and he thinks it's going to be Gray. He thinks Gray's going to be at this point where he could take out END, and then he doesn't realize that Juvia loves him to the utmost degree. Juvia is more likely to suicide than to ever harm Gray, and that's a fatal miscalculation on Invel's part. Overall, this chapter was very good in characterizing Invel, and if I was to say anything about Invel, I think he is a much more wiser character than, say, Eileen, because he's demonstrating some amount of how would I say this? He's demonstrating control. He's demonstrating humility. Oh, actually, that was another really good moment when Invel recognizes Gray as someone capable of being his comrade. That was a really powerful moment. Like, oh my god, he actually recognizes Gray's worth. That's pretty great. So Invel's showing this kind of character, and overall, I'm totally digging it. I really like his approach to things way more than I like Gray's approach to things in this particular chapter. And so, in terms of the characters, between him and Eileen, I think Invel is the much better grounded one, because Eileen has her psychological issues. That's a fundamental fact at this point. But Invel is showing some degree of control. He's showing some degree of introspection and being able to understand what Gray's going through and being able to see the potential in Gray. So in terms of a character, I think Invel is a very nicely done character. Anyway, I think I will leave it there. That's pretty much everything I wanted to say. It was pretty much a battle chapter. We've got a few things to look forward to, mostly how Juvia and Gray are going to get out of this, what Brandis is going to talk to Natsu and Lucy about, how Invel's going to feel when his plan is pretty much thwarted. But yeah, guys, let me know what you thought about this chapter, and till next time, have a good day. I will say that I like this chapter. Honestly, Gray's approach, or Fairy Tail's approach to the idea of darkness and light, yeah, I was okay. Otherwise, it was a pretty hard chapter to pull moments that were really notable out of. But anyway, yeah, till next time.